Jake Morrison sat in the metal chair and watched the aliens move around him. They were fast, so fast that sometimes he could barely see them properly. The big arena on Kepler Station was full of different creatures from across the galaxy. Some had scales, some had fur, and some looked like they were made of crystal. All of them moved much faster than any human could. The tournament happened every few months, and creatures from different worlds came to compete. Jake was 42 years old and had been a soldier for most of his life. His hands were rough from years of holding weapons, and his face had scars from old battles. But compared to the aliens around him, he looked like he was moving underwater. Commander. Zaraketh stood near the arena floor. She was 7 feet tall with green scales that shined under the bright lights. Her people were called the Veltar, and they were known as some of the fastest warriors in the galaxy. When she moved, it looked like lightning. Her eyes could see things happen in tiny fractions of seconds that humans could not even notice. Zaraketh looked at the human section, where Jake sat with other Earth people. She made a sound with her throat that was like laughing, but much harsher. Her long tongue flicked out between her sharp teeth. "Look at these slow mammals," she said to the Veltar warrior standing next to her. Her voice was loud enough for the humans to hear. How did they ever manage to leave their home planet? They move like they are stuck in thick mud. Captain Lisa Bennett sat next to Jake. She was younger than him and had blonde hair tied back in a tight knot. Lisa had been Jake's partner on many missions, and she did not like hearing aliens insult humans. Her face turned red, and her hands made fists. "Jake, are you going to let her talk about us like that?" Lisa whispered. Jake did not open his eyes. He sat very still with his hands folded in his lap. His breathing was slow and steady. To anyone watching, it looked like he was sleeping or thinking very deeply about something far away. The other Veltar warriors gathered around Zaraketh. They all started making their harsh laughing sounds. One of them pointed at Jake and said something in their own language. The words sounded like hissing snakes. The humans sent their slowest champion, Zaraketh announced. She wanted everyone in the arena to hear her. "This will be over very quickly. I have seen rocks move faster than this creature." The tournament rules were simple but dangerous. Each species would send one fighter to face different challenges. The challenges would get harder and harder until only one warrior remained. The final test was called the Arrow Gauntlet. It was a long corridor with 12 energy weapons that fired arrows at incredible speed. The arrows came from different directions and could kill most creatures instantly. No being had ever completed the Arrow Gauntlet with their eyes closed. Most fighters barely survived it, with all their senses working perfectly. The arrows moved so fast that even the quickest aliens had trouble avoiding them all. Jake opened his eyes slowly and looked around the arena. He saw the Veltar warriors, still laughing at him. He saw the crystal creatures called Zephyrians moving in ways that made them look like living diamonds. He saw the octopods with their 8 arms waving in the air like sea plants in a current. All of them were faster than him. All of them had better reflexes. All of them thought humans were weak and slow and would be easy to defeat. Dr. Amanda Cole walked over to where Jake and Lisa were sitting. Amanda was a scientist who studied alien life forms. She had short brown hair and wore glasses. She carried a tablet computer that was full of information about all the different species in the tournament. "Jake," Amanda said quietly, "the other species don't understand how humans fight. They think speed is the only thing that matters in combat." Jake nodded, but did not say anything. He had learned many things during his years as a soldier. He had fought in jungles where he could not see 2 feet in front of him. He had battled in space stations where there was no gravity and no air. He had survived on planets where the weather changed every few minutes. All of those experiences had taught him that winning was not always about being the fastest. Sometimes it was about being the smartest. Sometimes it was about being the most patient. Sometimes it was about seeing things that others missed. The announcer's voice echoed through the arena. It was time for the tournament to begin. Each species would choose their champion, and the challenges would start. Jake stood up slowly and walked toward the registration area. The other fighters were already there. Zaraketh towered over everyone else. Her scales caught the light and made her look like a deadly rainbow. The Zephyrian fighter looked like a walking piece of clear glass. The octopod moved its 8 arms in patterns that were almost hypnotic to watch. When Jake reached the registration desk, the alien official looked at him with confusion. The official had 4 eyes and blue skin covered in small bumps. "You are the human champion?" the official asked, in a voice that sounded like it was coming from underwater. "Yes," Jake said simply. The official looked at his tablet and then back at Jake. "Your species has never won a tournament before. Are you certain you wish to compete?" Jake looked at the official and then at all the other fighters who were watching him. Some of them were making sounds that he knew were laughter. Others were shaking their heads like they felt sorry for him. "I am certain," Jake said. Zaraketh stepped closer to Jake. She was so tall that he had to look up to see her face. Her yellow eyes studied him like he was some kind of interesting insect. "Human," she said, "you will not survive the first challenge. Your species is too slow and too weak to compete with real warriors." Jake looked at her calmly. "We will see," he said. The first challenge was about to begin, and Jake Morrison was ready to show the galaxy what humans could really do. Jake walked into the preparation chamber and moved like he had all the time in the world. The other fighters watched him with looks that ranged from confusion to outright contempt. They could not understand why someone so slow would even try to compete against them. The chamber was made of smooth metal walls and had bright lights that made everything look sharp and clear. There were weapons hanging on the walls and practice targets set up in different areas. Each fighter was supposed to spend time here getting ready for the challenges ahead. Zaraketh moved around the chamber like green lightning. Her movements were so fast that she left small trails of motion in the air. She practiced with energy weapons that fired beams of light. Every shot hit the center of the target perfectly. The other Veltar warriors did the same thing, their movements creating a deadly dance of speed and precision. The Zephyrian fighter looked like a living piece of crystal. When it moved, light bent around its body in strange ways. Its practice routine involved changing the shape of its body to avoid imaginary attacks. One moment it was tall and thin. The next it was short and wide. The changes happened so fast that Jake had to blink to keep track of them. The octopod had 8 arms that moved independently of each other. While 4 arms practiced with weapons, the other 4 worked on different combat techniques. It was like watching 8 different fighters all working together in perfect harmony. Jake found a quiet corner and sat down on a bench. He closed his eyes again and listened to the sounds around him. He could hear the energy weapons firing. He could hear the aliens moving across the floor. He could hear their breathing and the small sounds they made when they concentrated. Dr. Amanda Cole came into the chamber to check on him. She looked worried as she watched the other fighters practicing their incredible skills. "Jake," she said quietly, "are you sure about this? These creatures are operating on a completely different level than anything we have seen before." Jake opened his eyes and looked at her. "Amanda, I have been fighting for 30 years. I learned something important during all those battles." "What is that?" she asked. "The fastest fighter does not always win. Sometimes the smartest fighter wins. Sometimes the most patient fighter wins. And sometimes the fighter who pays the most attention to details wins." Amanda sat down next to him. "The other species do not understand that. They think physical speed is everything." Jake nodded. "That is their mistake. The first challenge was announced. It was a melee combat test where fighters had to defeat 3 robotic opponents using only hand-to-hand combat skills. The robots were programmed to fight at different skill levels and would adapt to each fighter's style. Zaraketh went first. She moved into the combat area like a green blur. The 3 robots activated and immediately began attacking her. She dodged their strikes easily and countered with movements that were almost impossible to follow. Her claws sliced through the air and disabled the robots in less than 30 seconds. The crowd of alien spectators cheered loudly. They had never seen anything move so fast during combat. Zaraketh barely looked tired when she finished. The Zephyrian went next. Its crystal body changed shape to avoid the robot attacks. When it struck back, parts of its body became sharp like knives. The robots could not land a single hit before they were destroyed. The octopod used all 8 arms to fight the robots at once. It was like watching a beautiful but deadly dance. Each arm moved independently, but they all worked together perfectly. The robots were overwhelmed by the complex attack patterns. Then it was Jake's turn. He walked into the combat area slowly. The 3 robots activated and began their attack patterns. Jake did not try to move faster than them. Instead, he watched carefully and moved only when he needed to. The first robot swung a metal arm at his head. Jake stepped to the side just enough to avoid it. The robot's arm hit nothing but air. Jake grabbed the robot's arm and used its own momentum to spin it around. The robot crashed into the wall and stopped working. The second robot tried to kick him. Jake moved his body slightly, and the robot's foot passed by his chest. He grabbed the robot's leg and pulled it forward. The robot lost its balance and fell. Jake pressed a button on its back, and it shut down. The third robot was more advanced. It studied Jake's movements and tried to predict what he would do next. But Jake did something unexpected. He stood perfectly still and let the robot come to him. At the last second, he moved just a little bit. The robot's attack missed, and Jake pushed it into the wall. The crowd was quiet. Jake had won the challenge, but he had not looked impressive doing it. He had moved slowly and carefully. He had not used any flashy techniques or amazing speed. "Pathetic," Zaraketh said loudly. The human barely survived. How does his species exist in a galaxy full of predators? The second challenge was ranged combat. Fighters had to hit targets that moved in unpredictable patterns while avoiding obstacles that tried to block their shots. Again, the alien fighters performed with incredible skill. Their enhanced reflexes and superior speed gave them huge advantages. They hit targets that were moving so fast that Jake could barely see them. When Jake's turn came, he did something different. Instead of trying to track the fast-moving targets with his eyes, he watched for patterns. He noticed that the targets moved randomly, but the obstacles blocking them followed a rhythm. He waited for the right moment and fired his shots when the obstacles were out of the way. Jake finished in the middle of the pack. He was not the best, but he was not the worst either. The alien spectators were starting to lose interest in him. They expected him to be eliminated soon. The third challenge was obstacle navigation. Fighters had to get through a maze filled with traps and barriers. Speed was important, but so was problem-solving ability. The Veltar warriors rushed through the maze like lightning. They avoided most of the traps through pure speed and reflexes. But some of the barriers required more than just fast movement to overcome. Jake entered the maze and immediately slowed down even more. He studied each section carefully before moving forward. He found hidden switches that opened secret passages. He noticed that some of the traps could be turned off by solving simple puzzles. While the other fighters used their speed to avoid problems, Jake used his patience to solve them. He finished the maze in a respectable time and had avoided all the traps. By the end of the preliminary challenges, 4 fighters remained. Zaraketh had dominated every event. Another Veltar warrior had also performed well. The octopod had shown incredible versatility, and Jake had somehow managed to avoid elimination. The betting odds had Jake at 500 to 1 against winning the final challenge. Most of the spectators thought he would be killed in the arrow gauntlet. Zaraketh approached him after the results were announced. "Human," she said, "you have surprised me by lasting this long, but the final challenge will destroy you. The arrow gauntlet has killed warriors much faster and stronger than you." Jake looked at her calmly. "Commander, I appreciate your concern, but I did not come here to quit when things get difficult." She studied his face for a long moment. "You are either very brave or very foolish." Jake smiled slightly. "Sometimes those are the same thing." The final challenge would begin soon, and Jake Morrison was ready to show the galaxy what happened when you underestimated a human being. The arrow gauntlet chamber was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The corridor stretched 50 meters from start to finish and was lined with ancient alien technology that hummed with dangerous energy. The walls were made of dark metal that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. 12 energy arrow launchers were positioned at different heights and angles throughout the corridor. Each launcher looked like a small cannon with a glowing blue core. The arrows they fired were made of pure energy and moved at speeds that approached the speed of light itself. Tournament officials gathered the 4 remaining fighters in front of the chamber entrance. The head official was a tall creature with gray skin and 3 arms. His voice echoed strangely as he explained the rules. Contestants have 30 seconds to traverse the corridor from start to finish. The arrow launchers will begin firing the moment you enter the chamber. Each projectile carries enough energy to kill most known species instantly. The firing sequence is completely random and cannot be predicted or memorized. Jake studied the corridor carefully. He could see scorch marks on the walls where previous arrows had struck. Some of the marks were very recent. This was not a test that many beings survived. "Protective gear is forbidden," the official continued. "You may only use your natural abilities. Medical safeguards are in place to prevent death, but serious injury is still possible." The other fighters looked nervous for the first time since the tournament began. Even Zaraketh seemed less confident than she had been during the earlier challenges. The octopod would go first. It moved to the starting line and flexed all 8 of its arms. Its strategy was clear. It would use its multiple limbs to create a defensive shield while moving forward. "Begin," the official announced. The octopod entered the corridor, and immediately the arrow launchers came to life. The first energy arrow fired from the left wall at knee height. The creature blocked it with 2 of its arms while continuing to move forward. More arrows fired in quick succession. The octopod's 8 arms moved like a whirlwind, blocking and deflecting the energy projectiles. For a moment, it looked like the strategy might work. Then 3 arrows fired simultaneously from different angles. The octopod blocked 2 of them, but the third struck it in the chest. The creature let out a sound like air escaping from a balloon and collapsed to the floor. Medical teams rushed into the corridor to help the injured fighter. The octopod was alive, but badly hurt. It would not be able to continue in the tournament. The second Veltar warrior stepped up to the starting line. He was younger than Zaraketh, but just as fast. His strategy was different from the octopod's. He would rely on pure speed to get through the corridor before the arrows could hit him. "Begin," the official said again. The Veltar warrior burst forward like a green lightning bolt. He moved so fast that he was almost invisible. The arrow launchers tracked his movement, but seemed to have trouble keeping up with his incredible speed. For the first 20 meters, the strategy worked perfectly. The warrior dodged arrows that would have hit slower fighters easily. His enhanced reflexes allowed him to see the energy projectiles coming and avoid them, but the randomized timing was designed to defeat even the fastest reflexes. At the 30-meter mark, 4 arrows fired in a pattern that created a trap. The warrior's speed carried him directly into the path of an arrow he never saw coming. He collapsed next to the corridor wall, his scales smoking from the energy impact. Like the octopod, he would survive, but his tournament was over. Zara Keth watched both failures with growing concern. She had been confident that her superior speed would carry her through the challenge. Now she realized that even the fastest reflexes might not be enough. She studied the arrow launcher positions intently. Her reptilian eyes could process visual information much faster than human eyes. She tried to find patterns in the firing sequence that she could use to her advantage. The arrows fire from different positions, but there might be a rhythm, she said to herself. If I can find the pattern, I can predict where the next shot will come from. Jake stood quietly behind her and listened to her planning. He had been watching the corridor carefully during both previous attempts. He had noticed something that the other fighters had missed. When Zaraketh's turn came, she moved to the starting line with determination. She had developed a strategy that combined her natural speed with careful observation of the arrow patterns. Begin, the official announced. Zaraketh entered the corridor with controlled speed. She was moving fast, but not at her maximum velocity. She wanted to be able to react to unexpected arrow patterns. The first few arrows were easy to avoid. Her enhanced reflexes and superior speed gave her a significant advantage over the previous fighters. She ducked under one arrow and leaped over another with fluid grace. At the 20-meter mark, she encountered her first serious challenge. 2 arrows fired from opposite sides of the corridor at the same time. She twisted her body in an impossible way and managed to avoid both projectiles. Crowd began to cheer as she continued forward. It looked like she might actually complete the challenge that had defeated so many others. But at the 40-meter mark, the randomized system created a pattern that even her incredible abilities could not overcome. 6 arrows fired in quick succession from positions that created an overlapping field of death. Zaraketh's speed and reflexes allowed her to avoid the first 4 arrows. She moved like liquid lightning, her body bending and twisting in ways that seemed to defy physics. But the 5th and 6th arrows came from angles that made avoidance impossible. She was struck by both projectiles and fell to the floor, just 7 meters from the finish line. She had come closer than anyone else, but it still had not been enough. As the medical teams helped her from the corridor, Zaraketh looked back at Jake with a mixture of respect and confusion. She had given everything she had and still failed. How could a slow human possibly succeed where she had not? The crowd fell silent as Jake approached the starting line. Many of the alien spectators had begun to leave, assuming that the human would fail quickly and badly. The few who remained were mostly curious to see how spectacularly he would lose. Jake stood at the entrance to the corridor and looked at the arrow launchers. He could see the energy cores glowing in each weapon. He could hear the subtle humming sound they made as they powered up. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the arena. He closed his eyes. The official asked if he was forfeiting the challenge. Jake simply raised his hand for quiet and remained motionless at the starting line. For 30 seconds, he stood perfectly still with his eyes closed. He was not moving, not speaking, not even seeming to breathe. The arena became so quiet that the only sound was the low hum of the arrow launchers charging their energy cores. Jake was listening. He was learning. He was preparing to do something that no being in galactic history had ever attempted. The starting signal sounded, and Jake Morrison stepped forward into the corridor of death with his eyes still firmly closed. Jake moved forward into the corridor with his eyes closed and his breathing steady. The first arrow launcher activated with a high-pitched whine that lasted exactly 3 seconds before firing. Jake's head tilted slightly to the left, and he took one small step to the right. The energy arrow seared through the air where his left ear had been a moment before. The projectile struck the wall behind him and left a smoking crater in the metal. The crowd gasped. It had to be luck. No being could possibly dodge an arrow. They could not see. Jake continued walking forward at the same steady pace. His face was calm, and his movements were smooth. He looked like a man taking a peaceful walk through a garden instead of navigating a corridor filled with deadly weapons. The second arrow launcher charged up with a different sound, a low buzzing that built to a crescendo. Jake's body swayed slightly to the left, just as the energy projectile blazed past his right shoulder. The arrow missed him by less than an inch. Zaraketh watched from the medical area where doctors were treating her injuries. Her yellow eyes were wide with disbelief as she saw Jake avoid arrows that he could not possibly see coming. "How is he doing that?" she whispered to the medic working on her wounds. The third and fourth arrow launchers fired in quick succession from different angles. Jake dropped to one knee, rolled forward, and stood up again in one fluid motion. Both arrows passed through the space where he had been standing moments before. The alien spectators who had remained in the arena began to lean forward in their seats. What they were witnessing seemed impossible. The human was not just surviving the arrow gauntlet. He was making it look easy. Doctor Amanda Cole stood in the human section with tears streaming down her face. She understood what Jake was doing, even if the aliens did not. Years of working with human soldiers had taught her about the unique way human senses work together. "He is not seeing the arrows," she said to Captain Lisa Bennett. "He is hearing them. He is feeling them. He is using senses that most species have forgotten exist." Jake reached the 10-meter mark, and the arrow launchers began firing more frequently. The energy weapons were programmed to increase their rate of fire as contestants moved deeper into the corridor. The fifth arrow came from directly above. Jake heard the launcher's power core shift to a higher frequency and took 2 steps backward. The arrow struck the floor where he would have been standing if he had continued forward. The 6th arrow fired from floor level on the right side. Jake heard the subtle change in air pressure as the weapon charged and lifted his left foot slightly. The arrow passed under his boot and embedded itself in the left wall. The crowd had fallen completely silent. Even the alien officials were staring at Jake with expressions of amazement. What they were seeing challenged everything they thought they knew about combat and reflexes. Jake's military training was guiding every movement. During his years fighting in jungles and caves and space stations, he had learned to trust senses beyond sight. On the planet Kepler 442b, he had tracked alien predators through dense fog by listening to the sound of their breathing. In the asteroid mines of Proxima Station, he had fought battles in complete darkness using only hearing and touch. The 7th arrow launcher fired from an angle designed to catch contestants off guard. Jake's body moved like water flowing around a rock. He bent backward at an impossible angle and let the arrow pass over his chest. His movements were so smooth that it looked like he was dancing. At the 20-meter mark, Jake encountered his first real challenge. 3 arrow launchers fired simultaneously from positions that created overlapping fields of death. This was the same pattern that had defeated the octopod. Jake's enhanced hearing allowed him to distinguish between the different power signatures of each launcher. The left weapon had a slightly higher pitch. The center weapon buzzed with a lower frequency. The right weapon made a clicking sound as it charged. He listened to the rhythm of all 3 weapons and found the tiny gap in their firing pattern. Jake dropped to the floor, rolled to his right, and sprang back to his feet. All 3 arrows passed through the space where he had been standing. Zaraketh made a sound that might have been a gasp. She was beginning to understand what she was witnessing. The human was not just avoiding the arrows. He was predicting where they would be fired before the launchers had even finished charging. Impossible, she whispered. His species evolved to process multiple sensory inputs simultaneously. They sacrifice pure speed for integration. Jake continued forward with his eyes still closed. The 8th arrow fired from a position near the ceiling. He heard the weapon's power core cycling up and ducked his head without breaking stride. The arrow passed over his hair and struck the wall behind him. The 9th arrow came from ground level. On the left side, Jake stepped over it like he was avoiding a puddle on the sidewalk. The energy projectile passed under his raised foot and dissipated against the corridor wall dot at the 30-meter mark. Jake faced the same challenge that had defeated the second Veltar warrior. 4 arrows fired in a pattern designed to create an inescapable trap. The weapons were positioned so that any normal evasion would carry a contestant directly into the path of another. Jake heard all 4 launchers charging with their distinct energy signatures. He analyzed the timing of each weapon and found the solution that pure speed could not provide. Instead of trying to dodge all 4 arrows, he moved into the path of one of them. The first arrow fired, and Jake stepped directly toward it. At the last possible moment, he spun around and let the arrow pass behind his back. The movement carried him away from the other 3 arrows, just as they fired through the space, where he would have been if he had tried to dodge normally. The crowd erupted in noise. Alien spectators who had been ready to leave were now standing and cheering. They had never seen anything like Jake's performance. Jake reached the 40-meter mark where Zaraketh had been defeated. 6 arrows would fire in quick succession from positions that created an overlapping field of death. This was the pattern that had come closest to killing the Veltar commander. Jake paused for a moment and listened to the symphony of charging weapons around him. Each launcher had its own distinct sound signature. The pattern was complex, but not random. There was a rhythm hidden in the chaos. He found the key to the puzzle. The 6 arrows would fire in a specific sequence that created momentary gaps in the overlapping field. Jake would have to time his movements perfectly to thread through those gaps. The first arrow fired from the right wall. Jake stepped left and let it pass. The second arrow came from the ceiling. He ducked and continued moving. The 3rd and 4th arrows fired simultaneously from opposite sides. Jake spun between them like he was dancing. The 5th arrow came from behind him. Jake heard the launcher charging and took a long step forward. The arrow passed through the space where his back had been. The 6th arrow fired from directly ahead. Jake dropped to one knee and let it pass over his head. He had survived the pattern that had defeated Zaraketh. Only 10 meters remained between him and the finish line. The final section of the corridor contained the most dangerous challenge of all. All 12 arrow launchers would fire in rapid succession, creating a storm of energy projectiles that had never been survived by any contestant. Jake stood at the 40-meter mark with his eyes still closed and listened to the deadly symphony building around him. 12 different energy signatures, 12 different charging patterns, 12 different rhythms, all building to a crescendo of destruction. He smiled. Jake stood at the 40-meter mark and smiled because he understood something that none of the other fighters had realized. The 12 arrow launchers were not firing randomly. Each weapon had its own charging cycle, its own energy signature, and its own rhythm. Together, they created a complex pattern that could be solved like a musical composition. The first launcher began its charging sequence with a high-pitched whine. Jake heard the sound and identified it as the weapon mounted on the left wall at shoulder height. The charging cycle would take exactly 4 seconds. The second launcher started charging with a lower buzz. This was the weapon on the right wall near the floor. Its cycle was 3.5 seconds. Jake continued walking forward at his steady pace, while listening to each weapon join the deadly symphony. His enhanced human hearing allowed him to distinguish between 12 different energy signatures. While his brain processed the timing of each charging cycle, the third launcher made a clicking sound as it powered up. The fourth weapon hummed with a frequency that Jake could feel in his bones. The fifth launcher created a sound like rushing water. One by one, all 12 weapons joined the chorus of destruction. Jake mapped each sound to a specific location and calculated the timing of each firing sequence. His military training had taught him to process multiple streams of information simultaneously. The arena was completely silent, except for the sound of the charging weapons. Even the alien officials had stopped talking as they watched Jake navigate the final section of the corridor with his eyes closed. Dr. Amanda Cole gripped the railing in front of her seat. She understood what Jake was attempting and knew that any mistake would mean death. The human nervous system was capable of amazing things, but this was pushing those capabilities to their absolute limit. The first arrow fired from the left wall. Jake heard the weapon discharge and stepped to the right. The energy projectile passed through the space where his shoulder had been a moment before. The second arrow came from the right wall near the floor. Jake lifted his left foot and let the projectile pass underneath. The arrow struck the left wall and created a shower of sparks. The third arrow fired from the ceiling. Jake ducked his head without breaking stride. The projectile passed over his hair and embedded itself in the floor. Behind him, the fourth arrow came from behind him at waist height. Jake heard the launcher discharge and took a long step forward. The arrow passed through the space where his back had been. The fifth arrow fired from directly ahead. Jake heard the weapon's distinctive rushing water sound and dropped to one knee. The arrow passed over his head and struck the wall behind him. The sixth arrow came from the right wall at head height. Jake leaned to the left and let the projectile pass by his ear. The energy arrow was so close that he could feel the heat from its passage. The seventh arrow fired from the left wall near the floor. Jake stepped over it like he was avoiding a crack in the sidewalk. The arrow passed under his raised foot and dissipated against the right wall. The eighth arrow came from the ceiling at an angle. Jake heard the weapon charging and moved his head slightly to the right. The arrow passed by his left temple and struck the floor. The ninth arrow fired from behind him at ankle height. Jake heard the launcher discharge and lifted his right foot. The arrow passed underneath and embedded itself in the wall ahead. The 10th arrow came from the right wall at shoulder height. Jake swayed to the left and let the projectile pass by his right arm. The arrow was so close that it singed the fabric of his uniform. The 11th arrow fired from the left wall at chest height. Jake heard the weapon's energy signature and stepped backward. The arrow passed through the space where his chest had been a moment before. The 12th and final arrow came from directly ahead at head height. Jake heard the launcher charging and knew that this was the moment that would determine whether he lived or died. The weapon's energy signature was different from all the others, more powerful and more deadly. Jake ducked his head and took one final step forward. The arrow passed over his hair and struck the wall behind him with enough force to crack the metal dot. He had done it. Jake Morrison had completed the arrow gauntlet with his eyes closed. The arena erupted in chaos. Alien spectators roared their approval while jumping up and down in their seats. Officials stared in disbelief at the human who had accomplished the impossible. Jake reached the finish line with 3 seconds to spare. He stood calmly in the center of the corridor and opened his eyes for the first time since entering the gauntlet. The corridor was filled with smoke and the smell of burning metal. Scorch marks covered the walls where the energy arrows had struck. But Jake was completely unharmed. Zaraketh pushed past the medical staff and approached the barrier that separated the arena from the spectator area. Her yellow eyes were wide, with amazement and respect. "Human," she called out, her voice carrying across the arena. "How did you do what my fastest warriors could not?" Jake walked over to face her. His expression was serious, but not unkind. "Commander, your people evolved to be incredibly fast. But speed without wisdom is just hurried failure." He gestured toward the arrow launchers that were powering down. "You saw 12 weapons firing at random intervals. I heard 12 distinct energy signatures, each with its own charging rhythm and flight characteristics." Dr. Amanda Cole joined them at the barrier. Her scientific mind was racing with the implications of what Jake had accomplished. "The human nervous system processes sensory information differently than most species," she explained to the gathered. "Aliens, we sacrifice pure speed for integration. We combine sight, sound, touch, and spatial awareness into a complete picture of our environment." Zaraketh's reptilian features showed something that might have been embarrassment. "We called." "You're slow," she said quietly. Jake nodded. "We are slow compared to you, but we are also patient, observant, and stubborn. In our history, we learned that the race does not always go to the swift." The tournament officials declared Jake the winner, but the real victory was much larger than any prize. The galaxy had just learned that the slow humans were not as helpless. As they appeared, Captain Lisa Bennett pushed through the crowd to reach Jake. She was crying and laughing at the same time. "Jake, that was the most incredible thing I have ever seen. How did you know you could do it?" Jake smiled at his old friend. "I did not know for certain, but I have learned to trust my training and my instincts. Sometimes that is enough." The alien spectators began to surround Jake, asking questions about human combat techniques. A crystalline Zephyrian wanted to know how humans developed such keen hearing. An octopod asked about the way humans processed multiple sensory inputs simultaneously. Jake answered each question patiently. He explained how human soldiers trained to fight in environments where vision was limited or useless. He described how humans had learned to survive on worlds where faster predators hunted them by developing superior pattern recognition and situational awareness. "Your species evolved different advantages," Jake told the assembled aliens. "You have speed or strength, or the ability to change shape. Humans evolved the ability to adapt to almost any situation." A young Veltar warrior approached Jake with obvious respect. "Human Morrison, would you be willing to teach some of our fighters your techniques?" Jake looked at the young warrior, and then at Zaraketh. "I would be honored to share what I can. But remember that each species has its own strengths. My techniques work for humans because of the way our nervous systems are built." Zaraketh stepped forward. "Jake Morrison, I underestimated your species badly. That was a mistake I will not make again." Jake extended his hand in the human gesture of friendship. "Commander, every species has its own advantages. Today, I was fortunate that mine matched the challenge. Tomorrow, the situation might be different." She clasped his hand with her clawed appendage. The gesture was awkward but sincere. "Perhaps, but I suspect your people will find a way to adapt, as they always do." Other alien warriors began approaching Jake to offer their own gestures of respect. The octopod touched him gently with one of its 8 arms. The Zephyrian changed its body color to match Jake's uniform as a sign of honor. Dr. Amanda Cole watched the interactions with scientific fascination. The tournament had accomplished something that years of diplomatic meetings had not. It had shown the galaxy that humans deserved respect as equals rather than pity as inferior beings. "Jake," she said quietly, "you have just changed how every species in the galaxy views humanity." Jake looked around at the aliens who were studying him with new interest. "That was not my goal. I just wanted to complete the challenge. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones we do not plan." Amanda replied. The celebration continued for hours. Jake found himself surrounded by warriors from dozens of different species, all wanting to learn about human combat techniques. He spoke with each group patiently, sharing what he could while learning about their unique abilities. A group of young Veltar warriors asked Jake to demonstrate how he had heard the different energy signatures. Jake closed his eyes and had them activate various pieces of equipment. He correctly identified each device by sound alone. "Your hearing is not better than ours," one of the warriors observed, "but you use it differently." Jake nodded. "Humans learn to survive by paying attention.